Hi, everybody. My name is Jane Terzes. I teach art here at UAS, and I'm here to introduce Jeremy Kane. Jeremy earned his Bachelor of Fine Arts degree at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and his Master's of Fine Arts degree at Ohio University. And Ohio University is one of the best schools in the country for ceramics. Both of those degrees are in ceramics. He's our ceramics professor here. In 2004, he received a Taunt Fellowship at the Archie Bray Foundation in Helena, Montana. Archie Bray is a foundation for ceramics, the first of its kind, and really the leading driver for defining ceramic art in the country since the 1950s. This is a very prestigious fellowship, and the way that I met Jeremy was that we had, 5 years ago, we had a full-time instructor, professor, had to withdraw 2 weeks before the school year started. So I said, well, I'm going to go find somebody else. I went down to my office and I called Jim Brashear in Fairbanks, University of Alaska Fairbanks, the ceramics professor there, and I told him what was going on, and he said, oh, I know somebody. I know him, and he wants to come to Juneau, and you'll love him. What's your phone number? So I gave him my phone number, and I sat by the phone. An hour later, I get a phone call from Jeremy Kane, and I explained the deal, and he said, I'll take it. I said, well, you got to understand, the year starts in 2 weeks, and you're in Montana. And he said, well, it just so happens that on Thursday, this is Tuesday, by the way, on Thursday, I'm flying to Juneau anyway, because I'm playing bluegrass at the Alaskan Hotel. So I said, cool. He already had a place to stay at the Alaskan, at least for the weekend, and instead of coming here for the weekend on Thursday, he moved here on Thursday. That meant that he had a solo exhibition that opened on a Friday night in Helena, and got here, on Wednesday, and he got here on Thursday. Alice and I picked him up at the airport, drove him out here, did his paperwork, showed him the ceramic studio in the kiln area, which had been in utter chaos for about 6 years. And he said, okay. And he went and performed his bluegrass at the Alaskan. And within 2 weeks, he had that kiln and the ceramic studio completely whipped into shape, and he was ready to go. And the students responded immediately to him. They love him. And so do we. He's a pleasure to work with. In the last 5 years, he's built with all recycled and salvaged materials, a brand new wood fire kiln and a pizza oven, wood-fired pizza oven outside. And he created a visiting artist program here. He's brought over 20 guest artists from around the country to Juneau, to UAS. He also travels once a year to the NCCA conference. I don't know what that stands for, but the C in it is for ceramics. Huge ceramics conference, national, and he brings students with him every year. He and his students in the last 5 years have created over 1,500 ceramic bowls donated to the Empty Bowls fundraiser for the Glory Hole. When I started work here 8 years ago, we think we had about 8 art majors. I just found out today that number is 78. And I also want to recognize a person who had a whole lot to do with that, Alice Turstig, who taught here for many, many years, retired last year, and she was responsible more than anybody else for us getting the BA in art degree, which has a whole lot to do with those 78 art majors. Thank you, Alice. Good work. Jeremy's such a delight to work with. If there's anything that needs to be done, he'll get her done. And not only that, he'll have fun doing it, and if you do it with him, you'll have fun too. So let's hear it for Jeremy Kane.
Thanks. Probably should have had Jane do my lecture for me. Thanks a lot for coming out. Thanks for supporting ceramics, and Jane, thank you for that great introduction. Well, I think we're going to kill these lights a little bit. Perfect. And, well, I'm going to lay down a little foundation for where I came from, and it has a lot to do with what my artwork is about in the end. So we'll take you through a little tour here of the past 15 years of my creative process. And we'll start in Springfield, Ohio, where I was born, and not in 1890. That was a mistake. It was supposed to be 1990. No. This is actually this is my parents' house, and this was when it was built, and then since then it's been reconditioned. And I spent my life pretty much working on the house with my parents, doing chores, and that was a good thing. You know, scraping walls, putting up wallpaper, having a good time, and buying a lot of antiques with my folks on the weekends. And I had a family of 6. So I was the youngest, and naturally I got to slide through the cracks at the end. My brothers and sisters were in college when I was in high school, and I felt like things were a little smoother for me than maybe everybody else in the family. So I don't mind celebrating my ideal lifestyle as a kid. So this happens to be the house over the years, 100 years later, and now it's been 20 years from then. And the house has had a lot of work, and the inside looks as good as the outside, and there's lots and lots of antiques. So without going into too much detail about Ohio, I guess one of my oldest stories I can remember was I was sitting at the table with my mom watching The Price is Right when I was 5 years old, I think maybe 6. And I was getting ready to go to kindergarten, and my mom asked me, I was eating my favorite lunch, by the way, which happens to be not today. It's still not my favorite. I will eat this lunch, though, okay? But it was mac and cheese with hot dogs sliced up nice. Pretty good, right? And my mom asked me if I wanted to go to school this year or would I rather go next year. And I said, Mom, I think I'd rather watch The Price is Right. And so I went to kindergarten the following year. And I guess this isn't the greatest advocate for education, but in the end, we'll turn it around. So I value these choices I had, and I feel like I've had those choices forever. And it's always been real special to be able to do what I want. And I feel like, I'm here doing what I want, teaching, making ceramics, so pretty happy, thanks to everybody that's here. And these choices, like I watched a lot of TV, and I look back on my past, and I'm like, wow, these were my influences, And then, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, which is even scarier yet, So at the end of this, you might like me and a little more. You might really see the truth here. So I was a kid. I watched Dallas with my folks. Like I said, most of the family was gone. Hung out with Mom and Dad a lot. And, this was my idea of success. It's like put on a suit and tie, right? And it's still actually is fairly my idea of success. But it's been honed in over the years. So my parents used to take us to a lot of, and this is where I learned compromises, at the antique show, making deals with people. My parents would slide me $20 and say, let's see what you can do today, And they'd leave me, and I'd be out running around the antique show at the flea market, having fun, looking for deals. And I think I saw a lot of ceramics at these flea markets because, the historic clay factories in Ohio and things like that, also with antiques. So we'd load up the family rig and take some vacations. This wasn't the only one we had. This is true. This is actually the car we had. Check this one out. That's a mean rig right there. Okay, so we'd go to flea markets, and my dad was really big into events. Like everything had to be some event. I guess with 6 people in the family, you just have to try to make it fun. And we had a pretty good upbringing. And we'd take a trip to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee every year, and that was always a pretty good time. Get to see my wax museums, my Elvis Presley imitators, and fireworks, and the Great Smoky Mountains, of course. My dad was a stockbroker, and he was also in the military, and he just loved gambling. And, I never knew it was maybe something that could be a bad thing. I grew up gambling. You know, we'd go to the track on the weekends. My dad would hand me Susan B. Anthony's. He'd hand me some 50-cent pieces, $2 bills along the way. You know, those were the special money that he would hand me. And we'd go to lots of events. And one thing I left out so far was that my parents moved. They met each other in the military, and my dad moved to Alaska with my mom and got married, and that was 1967. And so my oldest brother and sister were born in Alaska, and then ever since basically my mom and dad left Alaska, they'd always been wanting to get back, or maybe they ditched me up here, or you know, support one of their kids to go to Alaska. And so the first time I ever went to Alaska was 1982, and that was something I never forgotten. I've just been kind of reliving that ever since. So anyhow, these are the kind of events I grew up with, you know, as a kid. I got to go hang out with pro wrestlers, you know, go upstairs in the suite and meet the old guys, Andre the Giant, and all these big-time wrestlers. So anyway, here's my folks. This is just this year, here in Juneau visiting me. And so basically, after 18 years of having some pretty good choices and actually making a few choices along the line I think that were decent, I was able to work on ceramics when I was a kid. I went to the art center and took classes in adult watercolor and lots of ceramics up until like maybe I was 9, and then I started getting into cars and music, and there went art right now. So anyhow, I left for Alaska with my best friends, and this is kind of me leaving Ohio. It's kind of sarcastic. This is right next to this big flea market that we used to hang out when we were kids, and I mean, it's really out of control. But this is coming from my background. You know, this is beautiful, right? And so I left Ohio with my 3 best friends, and we went to Fairbanks for the heck of it to go to college, and it happened to be UAF there. No, we'd had it planned out since like 9th grade that we were all going to go to college in Fairbanks. So I left for Fairbanks. This is the university here. And essentially, in a weird way, this is kind of what I do. I'm not lying here. This is kind of one of the first things I remember of Fairbanks, you know, and have to say it's not what I think of Juneau. And but this guy, his name was Johnny Williams. He was an awesome guy, and he was kind of the old man in the art department. And he'd run around there just happy as a clam. And when I started taking classes, we got to meet this guy, and you know, I was blown away by how happy he was and his lifestyle. He'd drive this big Suburban, just throw everything in the back of it, and he'd be there working on stuff all day long. And you're just like, where do you get this time? Like, how do you do this? You know, like, how could you just sit in the studio all day and not do anything else? You know. And I didn't grow up kind of thinking that, even though my parents supported the arts. So when I saw Johnny really working, this is his house. My friends and I, we were really impressed by him. He was probably 75 at the time when we were 18, and we were all pretty good buddies. This is next door to his house. And I really started paying attention to these surfaces. It kind of reminded me of Ohio, and it reminded me of antiques and kind of this old-fashioned surface. But at the same time, it had a different appeal to it. I kind of thought of Alaska as the Wild West, or like the original place that nobody had touched, and I still think of it like that. So the college, I started wood firing, and I started taking ceramics classes pretty serious. And this is the first teapot. I'm not going to go any worse than this, but this is the first thing I think I ever made. And put it into a wood kiln, and I think I knew how to fire the kiln and work on things a lot more than I did know how to make things at the time. And I was trying to relearn the process. And really, I was trying to focus in on the everyday functionality of pots. And I grew up in a family that we ate every day at 6 in the morning, and you had to be there. And so I started working with functional pots, and it really became something that I thought was seriously important. So this is me wadding the bottom of a pot in a wood kiln. Quick image, quick details. Basically, I'm putting these little wads on the bottom of the pot made out of alumina that keeps the flame from sticking to the pot. So when the ash collects on the pot, the ash will kind of resist in those areas, and that pot won't be stuck to the shelf. So ash essentially is glass. So in a wood-fired kiln, what you're doing is you're stuffing as much wood as you can in the front of the kiln. The rest of the kiln has about 200 or 300 pieces. There's lots of different types of kilns. for the sake of going into wood firing, we're going to call this an onagama, which means single chambered, and that's the chamber right there. You can see my friends working on, and we've got it mudded up with ash, and that's the front. We call that the TV, and that tells us what temperature it is. So I was really into functional pots. This guy here, Tom Rohr, big inspiration. Loved to eat, loved to cook. And this guy, Jim Brashear, same way, a little different. Tom was kind of a city boy from Detroit, loved music. And Jimbo was kind of a country guy from Pennsylvania and loved to hunt. So these guys were pretty strong fans of myself, and I spent about 10 years being their grunts, so I'm glad they still like me. Anyhow, I was making functional pots, but I was trying to keep this surface on them, kind of an old surface. And these are some of my undergraduate pots for my BFA in Fairbanks. And I was really just trying to capture this antiquity and traditional ceramics, and I was really deep in ceramics at the time, and it had to do with the function. Everything had to do with eating and basically getting your hands on the work. And it wasn't so much content. I mean, the content was driven in the work, but the content later that I developed was in graduate school. So for a brief period of time, I took just a stint and went down to, as a Western graduate undergraduate exchange. I went to Bowling Green University and got to work with John Balistreri, and that's just a quick picture of that. And so I tried to get as much as I could out of undergraduate work. This is another wood-fired surface you'll see here on this picture. Little flask, tea bowls, creamer and sugar set. So this is Ohio University. I went to get my master's degree, and when I got there, I couldn't believe what had happened to me. I didn't realize that everybody in the world did not know a lot about pottery. I was in Fairbanks for about 6 years, and that's all we did was talk about ceramics. And I got to graduate school, and I realized there's a lot of other people out there doing a lot of things. There's a lot of people coming in, making different things. And I wanted to be a solid potter at the time, and that's what I was. But at the same time, I was encouraged to, I was realizing how much work looked similar to everybody else's, and I've been informing my work with other people's over the years, visiting artists and such. And so I wanted to kind of develop my own aesthetic. And of course, how do you do that? That's just kind of idiotic to think about how you're going to develop your own aesthetic. And so, of course, that was my mentality. I'm like, I'm going to figure out how to develop my own aesthetic. And I've been, copying Asian ceramics for years. That was my biggest influences, and to this day, that still is my biggest influence when it comes to making a pot and the form and the function of it. But I started thinking about my childhood, and I started thinking about, well, if I'm going to make art and I'm going to be in a graduate situation, why not start making more things that comment on things about my life? And although I had a great upbringing, it's kind of interesting to go back later on and have a different approach to how you were raised and what your icons were and how things were, folding out. So I started making a lot of different work at Ohio University. I was really encouraged by this man, Brad Schwiger, and that was his theory. Get to work. And it's a good theory to have, especially with the students, because it is, a lot of artwork is intuitive, and a lot of times it is about getting to work. And you do need an idea, don't get me wrong, but it's nice to be able to work intuitively. And Brad is one of those guys that would just come into your studio, and instantly, if you weren't working, he'd be like, get to work. And I value that. So I started working on these sets, started thinking about groups. I started thinking about what I like about pots, more so than, I do like to eat, granted we all do. And started thinking about what was I going to do to start speaking of my past or to give a little bit of a word in the pots. So I grew up, again, with, you saw the earlier slides, and my dad had a 1929 Ford Roadster, and started making pots that might reference this. I started switching things around and started feeling like, okay, why not start working on things that people don't make pottery out of or people don't make ceramics from, and oil pourers and things, and started relating oil to like cars rather than olive oil. And started breaking up things and trying to use different parts. And this is one of my first endeavors. It was a barbecue platter with a blow-up tire, and it was designed for anybody that wanted to drop this platter off the barbecue. It would actually hit the tire and kind of not break into 100 pieces. So I was working with these kinds of ideas, and then I really started tweaking it out a little bit and started thinking about Ohio, and I started thinking about truck stops, and I started thinking about traveling and road trips. And I realized that this stuff's fun, and it's funny, and it's part of Ohio, and it puts a little bit more of a concept into things, and it also questions how I grew up and questions a little bit of how you think I grew up. And it's pretty fun. And so when I started making this stuff, I noticed that a lot of ceramic people were a little bit, offended and stuff because I was making things that would be, I told them, I said, well, from now on, instead of selling it to people that want to buy your stuff, I'm going to sell it to people that, that like to pump gas or like to fix cars or like, just as far as I was concerned, those are the people, just the normal people in the world. And so I started making things that were a little bit more conducive to people that would work and do different things rather than be able to spend their day making art. And and at some point in time, I started working on this industrial. I was really stuck on these diner mugs, and I still am. And because they're nice and thick and heavy, and they're kind of an icon. And so what I wanted to do was kind of create like an icon of American culture, and that was it. So this would be ideally for a trucker that would be able to have all 4 cups and be able to pull it out at the truck stop, kind of throw it on the hood, and have some coffee with the boys. Diner scenes. Started trying to, I try to want to make my diner mug. So that's the one on the left that I say it's made in America. And the one on the right is what we consider a coffee cup. And that's, at 89 cents, you can buy that at Walmart. And it's actually a pretty nice coffee cup. And so it's one of those things to think about. I tell that to my students a lot of times. It's like, you can get references from a lot of places, and there's a lot of places that do things well. And, Walmart didn't actually glaze this, but somebody that has a degree somewhere along the line put this through a kiln and a process. And so I thought that, if I'm going to make ceramics, mine needs to at least hold up to Walmart quality. And so I actually, laugh now here. California, I got an award for this for like $350 along with a nice description of why I made this cup and how mine's made in America, and it's the traditional, So it was pretty cool. I got my cups back, and I got an award for this. And so I was really into, in graduate school, I was still trying to compete with ceramics a lot of places and put in a lot of applications for a lot of shows. So again, this is graduate work. Started working on larger jars. I started thinking about how I grew up, and I grew up in a pretty elegant house, and I started thinking about the stuff that my mom had sitting around and what she thought was beautiful, and how I could make something that was beautiful that potentially might not be so beautiful. And this was 2 years out of Alaska after living in Fairbanks for 6 years. So my love for Alaska was pretty heavy at that time. So I started working with sets, thinking about, what would people do, like in a bluegrass band, for instance, if they wanted some drinks on the back of someone's house, and this is what they'd bring them in. And that's the man that's on it. He's the father of bluegrass music, which has a lot to do with, I think, how I make things too. But it's not something I included into the lecture tonight as much as I could have, but I figure I'd try to leave you guys without having to wake you up in the end, So here's another set I was working on at the time, and these were sets that I'd buy. I'd go to the antique show and I'd find these cool things, and I'd go back in and recreate things for these, This is the bowling team that might have drank out of that. So again, I'm trying to really, like when I got to grad school, everybody's making fun of blue pottery, and I never heard that before, and now I kind of associate with it. So I was like, well, if you're going to make something good, you got to make it blue, and you got to put a flag on it, And this is before 9/11, which kind of changed the way that I'd work with the flag a little bit. But this was all before the flag had kind of become a little bit of a different thing, and I've stuck it out. And I was making really, beautiful teapots for NASCAR people. And, I was making intricate sets that would have stories on them that you might not want to hear or read, And so, like, I would take an icon like Elvis Presley, who could not do anything wrong, and, I would put the things that he was into the most, and I'd put them on cups, and there would be stories, and so you could, you have a sip of bourbon, and you could be reading the story about Elvis Presley. And if you actually read it, you might be a little bit blown away, So when I was in graduate school, like I said, things changed a lot for me. I started trying to look for another idea and another way to present my work rather than saying that everything was for food and everything had to be beautiful. and talk about another place that comes off beautiful every once in a while and also could be the worst place in the world is Las Vegas. And with my upbringing, you know, Las Vegas is a great place. And so I'm going to stick with that. And so I got into this, predicament where I was going to apply for this teapot competition in Las Vegas that my teacher's wife, Brad, had suggested for me to apply to. That was her favorite thing to do, was drop little notes in your studio and say, hey, check this out, you know, and she was all over it. There was 15 of us, and she would take care of us quite a bit. And so I decided that I was going to fly out to Las Vegas to do some research. And they didn't like the idea that I was going to fly to Las Vegas and skip school and this kind of stuff. And I did have a friend out there that was getting married and had a bachelor party I had to go to. And Kathy did drop that off on my desk, and I felt that gave me a great excuse to start working on a body of teapots from Las Vegas. And so I wanted to enter this competition, and so I turned it into a little bit of a problem because no one wanted me to go, and I kind of left in disregard. But I ended up getting third place, so I figured that gave me the excuse to come back to school. And so I started making teapots about Las Vegas, and I had a lady in the studio that was working with me in one of my classes. Her name was Jing. And Jing was, she was a Chinese woman that didn't speak English at all, and I don't speak Chinese. And we got along really well. And so what I liked about her pots, they were really small and beautiful, and it's like, wow, now this is a pot, you know, like I've been making this big, dumb stuff. That's what I was thinking for years, you know, like this lady just nails it, you know, every time she makes a pot. So I said, Jing, I said, I've got this competition. Well, I had to talk to her husband, and he talked to her. And I want you to make me a big, dumb American teapot. And all her teapots were just the finest, beautiful little teapots, and I wanted something just large and obtrusive so I could put some images on it. And so essentially this is a canvas for the images. And so she made this teapot, and I ended up finishing it. And that's what kind of got me into the idea that just because maybe I didn't make it didn't mean it wasn't art, and kind of started working with other people. And it was great for this competition, and also great for the whole idea of tea ceremonies and kind of a diverse cultural difference between the two of us. And so this was my first teapot that I sent in. And after going out to Las Vegas, I came back with some imagery, and I finished off some other teapots. And this, you know, this teapot came out of my mother's cupboard. And it's a fairly gorgeous teapot. I still stand with that. It's a little over the top, but this juror of this competition definitely did not mind. And so I really had fun with this, and the idea of competition has always entertained me a little bit too. So after that, I started to realize, okay, highly decorative, let's start moving towards just too much, and then we can back off. And not that this is too much, but basically Ming Dynasty ceramics was some of the ceramics that I grew up with. It's gorgeous. It's undeniably one of my bigger influences. And what I'm trying to work with is how I can take these images from American culture and kind of mix and match and kind of create something from a distance that's as beautiful as something like this. And it might potentially, you know, maybe my mom wouldn't quite get up on it close enough that she'd still think it was beautiful. And so this is one of mine. And you can see references for NASCAR and Johnny Cash, and that's Ralph Stanley's mom. And a lot of times I would seal things with presidential seals and lots of luster. And the idea was these forms are so classical that it makes everything look real and it makes everything look believable. And, you know, in the future when somebody digs these up out of the ground, it'll be kind of fun. How many pieces of earthenware can you dig up, you know? And so this is from National Enquirer magazines. My great-grandmother used to be in a nursing home, and I used to bring her a Budweiser beer and a National Enquirer. I think probably that was like my job for 5 years of my life. And these images came from that magazine, and they're real. Because if you read it, it's real. So I started having a lot of fun with this stuff. And this is when I graduated from Ohio University, and I was yet unprepared, and I shouldn't say unprepared. I did not want a job, and I did not want to apply to jobs. I wanted to go to the Archie Bray. And the Archie Bray is a place that I've been trying to get into since I was 18. I would mop the floors when I was 18 years old to go there. And so I got accepted for a year residency, And this is what it looks like. It used to be a brick factory in the 50s, and they condemned the brick factory and turned it into an artist residency. And it's one of the residencies that helped kind of define ceramic art in the country. Peter Volkus and Rudy Audio had come from L.A. area and San Francisco area, Berkeley, and decided they were going to come out here. And they heard about this place that had shut down, and they wanted artists. And these guys came out there. And if you do your homework, it's essentially kind of one of the first moves that started ceramic art in America. And Peter Volkus and Rudy Audio were the founders. And this guy here was Josh DeWeese. He was one of my first visiting artists I ever had in Fairbanks, and to this day, one of my favorite potters, and good buddy. And Josh was up here this year, but he's who really the reason why I wanted to go to this place was to work with Josh, because he's a true professional. So when I got there, I realized we were going to be going to lots of little fairs and things, and I didn't realize this. I thought I'd be in my studio working all the time, and so I quickly had to come up with a body of work that I thought I could sell to people. And also, some of these fairs were similar to some of the fairs that I went to when I was a kid. I mean, you never know who was going to be selling stuff there. We were there to represent the Archie Bray, talk to people in the public, and so I decided I would develop this body of work, which I'd been working on anyway, and I would just call it junior ware. And these were simple pots, tip jars, with rubber gaskets so you could really slam it down and not break anything. Little tea bowls that were still derivative of Asian culture but had a little bit more of American flair. Ice cream dishes with chrome knobs. And, you know, you get that in your hand and put that chrome knob right here and have a little ice cream. It's the way to go. Here's the gold sector of that. And I started displaying things a lot on rubber and different materials. You know, rather than just putting something on a table, I was thinking, well, where would this really be displayed, or how do I want this displayed? And at the time, I had kind of a side story. I'll keep it short, but I had a few people up in Columbus, Ohio. I was working on this idea of casting my own diner mugs, and so I had these people making these diner mugs for me for a long time. And they used to sit in their basement and they'd drink wine and paint on Jesus and Mary's, and put little decals on and stuff like that. And they had no idea. They were like, what are you doing with these cups? You know, like, what are you doing with all this stuff? And so eventually I'd give them some cups for their cupboards, and they would pour a lot of these cups for me. That was a little endeavor I had at the time. But essentially it was kind of touching base with a little bit of the culture of American ceramics. And these people were pushing 80 years old, and you'd walk into their house, and there would be more ceramic stuff in their kitchen while she's cooking cheeseburgers than you've ever seen in our studio. You know, it was pretty fun to see people like that. So simple dishes, you know, peanuts, sitting around having some beer, nice rubber top on it, so when that handle sits on the table or slams against the porcelain, it sounds nice. And so then I started thinking about, well, why not make, you know, we have a lot of things that are made in different countries, and so why not start making things that are from America that are about other countries? And so I started making souvenirs of Asia. And this was a lot of fun. And it was great because they were very attentive, you know, and they'd have people confused. You know, at the Archie Bray, there's a lot of people that really know what they're doing out there. And so it's pretty fun to watch people walk into a gallery, you know, because, you know, you can be off to the side and they know what they're doing. And so watching them walk up to this stuff and look at it, and that's priceless, okay? And I'd wrap them in these beautiful packaging, and I'd put them in these, instead of wood boxes, or I'd put them in plastic, you know, plastic cases. And so during my stint at the Archie Bray, I had another solo show, so I had applied for the Bray, and I also applied for the solo show, and I got the acceptance for both of them at the same time, and I was thinking, well, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge. So the first 6 months at the Bray, I spent working on this show about Kentucky, and it was called Kentucky Fried Ceramics, and it was at an old Carnegie Art Museum. Pretty cool place, and it was a large opening of about 15 different artists. And so I got to display my work, and I thought, well, what a better place to make fun of make fun of some things, except for right near my hometown and right down the street from Kentucky. And so Kentucky Fried Ceramics, I started doing an installation about Kentucky and of all the things that were specific to Kentucky, and I used bluegrass as a reference. And this is also a little bit of, like kind of what I think normal people do every day is they wake up and they put on their hat and they have a cup of coffee, and then they go to work, okay? And this was an award section for bluegrass music, and I had an old record player playing in this gallery. And again, this is a Carnegie Art Museum. It was built in the latter part of the 1700s, early 1800s. So it was old creaky floors, and I had a record player. And when you walk in this installation, it felt pretty good. It felt nostalgic, and it also was sarcastic. I'd take plates like this, and I'd break them in half, and then I'd go back in and put the gold leafing on there and glue them all back together. That chicken right there is actually real, and I had shellacked that for about 4 months straight before I sent it. And so it's pretty much, it's if you shake it, you can hear the chicken inside, This is where people could go over and turn the record player on. This was pretty fun because, you encourage people, they're like, well, are you going to play some music? And you're like, go put one on, and then they go over to the record player and put one on. And not too many people at this time period still listen to records, and then you get somebody that's a little younger and they're going over there and it's like scratching, and it's like the gallery's just echoing, and everyone's looking over at them. It was fun. And so lots of images and lots of stories on these bottles, and probably stories that a lot of people might not even read, but at the same time, if you ever sat down to read them, they're fun. And this was a bar set that I did, and this was maybe all the people that would sit at a bar in the afternoon that would be from different parts of the world that would still all come together with one success, that it was 5 o'clock or depends on what time, And they all had their own stories, and they were all professionals in their own right. And they would sit at the bar and talk about how professional either they were or they used to be. And I still think that's a great thing. So this was my fellowship exhibition at the Bray, and when I was at the Bray, I have a great time there, and it was an interesting place to be after living in Ohio for 3 years in graduate school, and I was ready to move on. And after a year there, I met 25 to 30 artists that came in throughout the year, and it just became overwhelming. And at the Bray, you're allowed to stay 2 years, and so I made the good choice, I believe, in leaving, that year, because I'm allowed another year back. And since then, the face of the Bray has changed. There was a $500,000 project out there since then. There was all new studios. When I was there, I was the last of the people that got to work in the chicken coops, and I definitely take pride in that. So I made a show I was doing current events, and also I had spent a lot of time looking at large galleries and Asian ceramics and how they display things on the wall and how things feel a little monumental when you walk in. And so I started working with, again, different forms, but I was trying to tell stories, and I would set things up and tier them so when you walked in it looked, fairly lavish and expensive. And you can see that's a Montana plate that has the McDonald's emblem on it. And wherever I've been, I've always tried to poke fun of the culture a little bit, and also wherever I've been has always been my favorite place. So I am having fun again, but it's interesting. This one here, my friend Liz owns this one. I wish I could have it back. That was when Michael Jackson really started getting in trouble, and so I put it all over this jar, and it'll be there forever. NASCAR and Elvis. This NASCAR, last long story here. This NASCAR, this lady from California, she was 80 years old. She came into the studio, and I hadn't even set up my show yet. She walked in and was like, I want that pot. She's like, how much is it? Like $1,400. She's like, I'll have my daughter write you a check. Thank you so much. And that was it. It's the last I talked to her. I'm looking for people like that if you know them. Okay, so now I live in Auk Bay, and I love it out here, and work at UAS obviously, and this is my office on a good day. And we have a little bit of a program we're working on. And the students, thanks for coming out, supporting ceramics. And this is the wood kiln I built when I got here. And when I first got here to the job, it definitely was a technical exploration. And I spent about 3 years working on technical things. And the past couple years have been really good because I've gotten the time to make my own work. But I did build this kiln with the students, and I feel like I still have some of those students, so I think it was worth it. This is the kiln in action, Saturday afternoon. And some current work before I get to my exhibition, which is kind of why I wanted to do this talk tonight, was because of the exhibition that I just had at the State Museum. And it was a fun exhibition, and I felt like it was the first exhibition I could do what I wanted rather than worry about what so-and-so thinks or worry about my graduate professors or worry about anybody but myself, and really just have a lot of fun. So I was like, oh, I'm going to paint this truck on the wall. Kind of reminds me of my hometown. Like, I did grow up in Springfield, Ohio. It's pretty much a factory town, and IH, that's where they build all the trucks. And when I was a kid, part of our, growing up was playing around on these trucks and where we shouldn't have been. Still derivative of a lot of the stuff that I've worked on for the past, 10 years. And I feel like that things are finally starting to make even more sense. And from graduate school, I feel like I left there with a good idea. And I've been having a lot of fun executing it. These are installation shots. Juneau, Alaska. Ever heard of it? All right. Well, this is the tail end of this, and thanks for coming out and dazzling me. This is our new house. And we're quite happy to be here, Allison and I. Oh. Thank you. I don't know if there's any questions or not, or whether I drug on too long, but thanks.
Now we have time for questions. And if you have a question, just raise your hand. We'll bring you a mic.
Question. Let's do this official.
When you make ceramics and people eat from the ceramics, I know that a lot of children's toys nowadays, there's a lot of caution given to kids chewing on toys because of the paint.
Sure.
What is the nature of the paint on the ceramics, on dishes, cups, and stuff when you're using it? Is there...
It's bad for you. Well, like I said, I've taken things a little bit out of the functional realm, but actually what you're seeing on the surface is a glaze, and it's not toxic. And if I work with something like if it was a dinner plate and I would put a surface like that on there, it would be really just for decorative purposes, for lack of better terms.
So what exactly is the glaze, though? I mean...
Well, it's called China paint, but all it is it's the same as another glaze, except it's fired to a lower temperature. So, I mean, technically you can glaze a ham, but you're only firing it up to about 350 degrees, right? So it's the same thing, except it's fired to like 1800, and there's ceramic materials in it. It's just not fired as hot as what some of the other pots that I have. And so it's going to scratch off over a period of 20 years, whereas another surface, if it's into the surface of the glaze, it's never going to come off.
So if it was, let's say, a cup, and you were to scratch the cup where you drink it, would it be toxic, the part that was scratched? Or
You'd play a pretty hard time scratching off a decal. Yeah. And actually, you know, I kind of like the way they look after they've come out of the dishwasher and been beat up a little bit. Like, if I, you know, when I take pots home, I know that like a week or two later, they kind of start looking like a real cup rather than just coming right out of the kiln and being so fresh. But, you know, that's not even a real concern. Like, if somebody would be worried about that, then I'd tell them not to buy it.
I was just curious.
Yeah, it's a great question. You kids over there have any questions? All right. Well, thanks a lot, you guys. If there's nothing else, appreciate you guys coming out.